Welcome to Debugging Dan, where I share weekly my journey balancing life, a full-time job, and side projects. I'm Dan, your host. Let's dive in. Today's topic will be about how I just finished up Observalyze and preparing to release this podcast for the first time. So, recording this and the broadcasting of this, there will be some time in between. But before I get into that, today are the European elections here in the Netherlands, where I'm from, which is a topic which is at the moment very political important, because there are some electional things happening in the Netherlands. So we had a election last year, November, a local selection or election, and a very right party was elected, and they were having trouble forming a cabinet. I guess that's what it's called in the Netherlands. And the cabinet that they eventually formed was kind of against Europe, and they need a lot of things from Europe. And that's why these European elections are important, to either, if you're not right, not liberal, but more social, to give a counter voice to the election of the right parties, or if you're right, to give your voice again to the right party so they can perhaps influence Europe for the coming, I believe it's 4 years. But the elections in Europe, so that's currently important. And currently I'm in a car commuting to work. So I have to work, so I will probably vote after work, because the voting location is open until 9. So I'll be voting today. And the topic for today I'd like to talk about is finishing up Observalyze and starting on the podcast. So I finished up Observalyze a week ago, I believe. And it's online. And in my task planning, I said finishing up Observalyze, creating the podcast, to be able to use that as a marketing thing also, but also to get it out. This podcast is not only about marketing, but it's about getting myself known, and also I'd like to interact with people who are doing similar things as I am. So that's next on my to-do list. And after that is the marketing for Observalyze. And this episode will probably be part of that, since I'm talking about Observalyze in here. So it might be the first or the second episode. I need to look at the planning. It may even be the first, besides from the interaction. But yeah, I finished it up. The demo is working. I'm not that happy yet with the user interface that I created for the SDK. It's still a bit simple and a bit boring. So after I do the podcast and the marketing on my task list, I said returning back to Observalyze and fixing bugs and fixing some things that turned out to be annoying, either from feedback from users, if there are any, or some stuff that I encountered myself, together with completing some tasks that I wasn't able to finish for the MVP and will finish later. And what I think I will do is, well, I will also give a deadline. So I give myself the maximum of a week to go through that list. So I need to prioritize it for the most important things, because else I might run into the situation that I will eventually take another month to finish up these additional tasks, while I also like to be working on other things. So I just came up with that, and I think that's smart. It also, again, gives me a kind of a deadline, which helped in completing Observalyze. So yeah, and so I've completed Observalyze. It's online, but it's just as online as it was before, because before it was only about event tracking and statistics and analytics for your SaaS app. And now the gamification part kind of replaced that, even though the analytics is still in there. And what I also plan to do is to record a video of me adding Observalyze to Data Store, one of my other projects, just to show that as an introduction and to highlight how easy it is, basically, to add Observalyze to an existing project. And it's already in there. So for the video, I might just temporarily remove it, and I just need to have a look. So that's it for now. So I kind of completed Observalyze, but it didn't really change anything because there's not a lot of users flocking to it. Nobody knows it's there, same as it was before, which is kind of what always happens when I release something. I have a problem giving it proper marketing and making it known that it's out there. And I say marketing, but I don't mean it in the bad sense that a lot of people have about marketing. I don't play to the tricks. I just want to announce it, make it available, and help people make their products better. It's not really about all those marketing tactics and tricks, because I try to keep it as close to how I am as possible, and that's really not a slick marketing talk about things, but I'd like to have my projects speak for themselves. And I'm learning that that's pretty difficult, because to have people recognize that it is something that could help them, they need to have seen it, they need to have interacted with it. So you need a way to get them there, and hopefully then it will speak for itself and will help people and will also help me by learning from people and making it better. So for the podcast, I had to do a couple of things. I haven't done a podcast before, so I need to learn about editing, improving audio, especially because I'm recording this in the car, so there's background noise that hopefully I will be able to remove that with some additional filters. I want to do two different options. I want to learn how to do it in Audacity, which is an open source audio editor, which I'm also going to need just to edit the audio a bit. For example, the intro and the outro need to be added, and I might really mess up during the recording, so I want to remove that. But the goal is to do all the recordings in one take and not have any editing done. That's the goal. But since I have never done a podcast before, I'm not really sure whether that's really feasible. So we need to check the final product for doing that, and then to try using Audacity and also using, I believe it's called Adobe Audio Enhancer, which is just an API you send your file to and then get it back. And then I'm going to compare the two, which one's better, and just use that probably, which one's better. And I also learned how to use the OpenAI Whisper project to generate transcripts for the podcast. So I can also include those. I've installed an open source podcast solution. I forgot the name, but it's a PHP project. It's CastorPod, I believe, CastorPod. And I've installed that so that I'm able to publish from there. I could have also gone for a commercial thing like Transistor, for example, but I'd like to keep things in control and also low budget. So I'm pretty familiar with technical stuff, so I know how to install a software package and maintain it. So I figured I'd just do it myself. I already have the server, and this won't cost me any additional money. And I might decide to change that later. So what I figured is that I'd serve the feed and then, or at least the RSS feed, and I serve that from my own server, and then I can always later on decide if I can redirect that to a different file. For example, if I decide to move to Transistor, I could just update the RSS feed URL on my own domain instead of having to update the podcast feeds, because I don't know if that will go over properly, or that I then need to create a new podcast because I'm changing the RSS feed URL. So I've decided to do this, which means that I control where the file lives and what the content is. So that's what I've done. And kind of what I didn't do was really about the content of the podcast. So the technical stuff I've been working with, I've been working on a project that I have that allows me to generate a static site and a blog from Notion pages. So it's not an official product, but I've used that for the static pages on the other projects that I have. And I figured, hey, I can also use that for the debuggingdan.com website, which is true. And the configuration for that was living in a JSON file. So every time I edit the page, I needed to add a site, I needed to update the JSON file manually. And for me, that was a good excuse to decide, hey, I'm going to put this in my SaaS boilerplate and already create a user account to log in around that, because that comes from is basically part of the SaaS template that I use, or the boilerplate. So I created a web configuration element around that, and so that I don't need to change things manually, because what I want to do for the podcast, I want to have, for example, debuggingdan.com/001. I want to have that redirected to a blog page specifically for that podcast, where you can read the transcripts and also a summary. And then for the future, what I'd also like to build is automation for that. So when I upload a MP3 file somewhere, that the audio gets improved automatically, that the transcripts are generated, that the summary is generated automatically. So I'd like to automate this as much as possible. And one of the reasons that I'd like to build automations, and also it takes me less time if everything is generated already and ready to go. To go back to what I just said, I've been mostly working on the technical parts. I'm almost done with the updates to the blog site thingy that allows me to manage the website easier. I'm almost done with that. Yeah, I'm silent because I just realized that I need to reorder something because pages are not recognized if the blog is at the root URL, and that's nowhere related to this podcast. It's just an internal thingy, but I just realized that. So you can ignore that part. So, and once that's done, and I'm getting motivated for that, I'd like to write out the introduction that I have, or I'd like to have a static basic introduction that explains this is the Debugging Dan podcast, and we're talking about life and technology, and we did not only debugging software, but also debugging life. I need to figure out what to say, and also want to create an outro that says thanks for listening, check out one of my products, check me out on Twitter, YouTube, etc. And then that's most of it. I'm not really good in user design, but for the podcast, I need a thumbnail for the podcast itself and for every episode. And my wife generated a cool image with a D and some bugs on it. So that's what I'm going to use for both the podcast and the thumbnails for every episode. I'll keep that as a logo somewhere, and then I'll just do a static or a plain color background and some text on it with the title of the podcast or the title of the episode. And at some point, I think I'm going to evolve the thumbnails into something better. I am now learning I just like to get started instead of getting hung up on details like that. So that's what I'm doing. So probably the thumbnail for this podcast episode is pretty bland, but I hope that won't scare off people. It's not really the correct word, but I hope that won't scare off people and just allows them to still listen, because I hope that the content that I create is fun for people to listen to and helpful, and people learn from it, from my journey. And that's what I hope. So to conclude, Observalyze is done, working on the podcast, and after that, I'm going to work on marketing for Observalyze, and that entails sharing on social media, creating the data store, integration video of Observalyze, sharing on Reddit, on Twitter, and more stuff that I need to figure out. So that's what I'm going to do in the coming weeks. Thanks for tuning in to Debugging Dan. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe and leave a review. Stay curious, and see you next week.